Okay, so you want to build a rental property empire? Buy a house, rent it out, buy another, rent that one out too. Do it enough times, and the rent checks replace your salary. That's the pitch. That's the seminar. That's the YouTube thumbnail with the guy standing in front of 5 houses with his arms crossed. Here's the strange part. The bigger your empire gets, the less of it you actually own. Not in the legal sense. Your name is still on the deed. In the sense that matters. Every property you add pulls in a new layer of people who take their cut before you do. The manager, the insurer, the tax assessor, the contractor, the lawyer who handles your eviction. By the time your empire hits 10 doors, you're not the owner anymore. You're the last person in line to get paid on your own asset. And most people building this empire don't find that out until they're already 12 houses deep. And here's why that matters more than it sounds like it does. You didn't just spend a weekend on this. You spent years saving the down payments, sitting through mortgage approvals, learning the difference between a good tenant and a bad one the hard way. You leveraged yourself, house after house, on the promise that scale would make the whole thing safer. If it turns out scale actually makes it more fragile, the damage isn't a bad quarter. It's a decade of equity tied up in an asset that was quietly designed to feed everyone but you. Here's how the pitch works. You buy a $300,000 rental. You put 20% down, $60,000. You rent it for $2,400 a month. Your mortgage is $1,600. That's $800 a month in your pocket, or so the spreadsheet says. Multiply that by 10 properties and you're clearing $8,000 a month without getting out of bed. That's the entire empire in one sentence. And it's the sentence that sells the course. Here's what the sentence leaves out. That $800 isn't profit. It's what's left before anything goes wrong. And in this business, something is always going wrong. Let's do the math on what actually happens to that $2,400. First, the mortgage takes $1,600. You're at $800. Then property management takes its cut because you're not managing 10 houses yourself. Not while working a day job, and the moment you try, you'll understand why. Management companies in 2026 charge 8 to 12% of monthly rent, with 10% the most common rate for a single-family home. On $2,400, that's $240 gone before you've spent a dollar on the property itself. You're at $560. Then insurance. Landlord insurance isn't optional, and it isn't cheap. The average landlord pays between roughly $2,017 and $2,192 a year, which is around $170 to $180 a month every month, whether anything happens or not. You're at $390. Then property tax. Depending on your state, that's another $200 to $400 a month on a $300,000 property. Let's say $300. You're at $90. On a property that was supposed to hand you $800. And we haven't touched maintenance yet. We haven't touched vacancy. We haven't touched the month your tenant stops paying and you have to evict them. $90 is what's left of the dream before the actual business of owning a rental has even started. That's not a rounding error. That's the entire empire standing on a number that can go negative the moment one thing breaks. The pitch shows you the mortgage. It never shows you the queue of people standing behind the mortgage, waiting for theirs. Before we even get to leverage, notice something buried in that $1,600 mortgage number. It's not the rate you'd get on your own house. Investment property mortgages in 2026 run roughly half a point to a point and a half above the primary residence rate, with the average 30-year primary rate sitting around 6.8%. An investor buying the same house to rent it out is paying closer to 7.3% to 7.8%, purely because the lender knows that if things go wrong, you'll protect the roof over your own head before you protect this one. On top of the higher rate, lenders typically require 15 to 25% down instead of the smaller down payments available to owner-occupants. So the $60,000 you put down wasn't just a choice. It was the price of admission the lender set, specifically because you don't live there. And that mortgage itself is doing something the seminar never explains properly. Leverage is the entire reason the empire feels possible on a normal salary. You're controlling a $300,000 asset with $60,000 of your own money. That's 5-to-1 leverage. It's also the reason a small move in the wrong direction turns into a large move against you. If your rent drops 10% in a soft market, which is exactly what's happening in several major metros right now, where prices are up but rents are flat or falling, your $90 margin doesn't drop 10%. It goes negative because the mortgage payment doesn't care what the market is doing. It's fixed. Everything else around it is what absorbs the shock, and at $90 a month, there's almost nothing left to absorb it with. Here's the part that makes leverage genuinely dangerous instead of just uncomfortable. 10 houses at 5 to 1 leverage isn't 10 separate small risks. It's one large risk repeated 10 times, usually in the same city, usually exposed to the same local job market, the same local insurance regulator, the same local rent trend. When investors talk about diversifying into rental property, what they usually mean is buying more of the exact same bet. Why does the manager get paid before you do? Because you can't scale a rental empire with your own 2 hands. And the moment you can't, somebody else's hands become mandatory, and mandatory hands are never free. Here's what a management contract actually contains, and almost nobody reads past the headline percentage. 1. The monthly fee, 8 to 12% of monthly rent, with 10% the most common rate for single-family homes. That's the number in the brochure. 2. The placement fee. Every time a tenant moves out and a new one moves in, you pay again a one-time fee of 50 to 100% of the first month's rent. On a $2,400 rental, that's up to $2,400 gone the moment a new tenant signs. Tenants move out roughly once every 2 to 3 years on average. Do that math across 10 properties, and you're paying a full month's rent away again and again, forever. 3. The renewal fee, the maintenance markup, the inspection fee, the setup fee. One 2026 industry breakdown found that once every ancillary charge is counted, the 10% management fee actually costs you closer to 16% once all fees are included. And here's the piece almost no first-time landlord realizes is negotiable. The fee percentage itself moves with your portfolio size, not your relationship with the manager. A landlord with 10 or more units can often negotiate a rate down towards 6 or 7% purely on volume. A landlord with 1 house has no leverage to negotiate anything. You take the rate on the listing page because the manager has 100 other single-house clients who will pay it if you won't. The exact same service at the exact same company costs you more per door simply because you own fewer doors than the person negotiating next to you. That's not a hidden fee. That's a hidden penalty for being small, built into a pricing structure that looks flat until you actually compare notes with a bigger owner. The lesson buried in all 3 of these fee types is the same one. Professional property management is not one product with one price. It's a market with volume discounts, and the volume discount goes to the empire that's already big, not the empire that's trying to become one. Here's the part that breaks people's brains. The manager's incentive and your incentive are not the same incentive. You want low vacancy and low maintenance spend. The manager, on a percentage of rent model, wants rent to go up, and on a maintenance markup model, wants repairs to happen because maintenance markups typically run 10 to 25% on top of whatever the contractor already charged. The person you hire to protect your margin is structurally rewarded for shrinking it. Anyway, if you're still with me, subscribe now, because we're about to get into the parts of this business that actually decide whether you keep the house or lose it, and you don't want to miss where the real damage happens. The manager isn't the villain here. The manager is a business too, and businesses charge for their time. But the moment you hand over the keys to make your empire scalable, you've also handed over a slice of every dollar the empire generates, permanently. Scale doesn't remove the middleman. It just makes the middleman a bigger line item. Now, the honest objection to everything so far: not every landlord is losing money. Plenty of people have owned rental property for 15 years and done extremely well. And if that's you, none of this is an accusation. What separates the ones who did well from the ones who quietly bled out is rarely the property. It's whether they underwrote the $90 number from day one or the $800 number, because the difference only shows up 3, 5, 10 years in, when the roof needs replacing and one of them has a reserve account and the other has a credit card bill. Here's what nobody tells you before you buy your first rental. The two costs you have the least control over are the two costs rising the fastest. Start with insurance. In 2026, landlord insurance premiums have risen 119% over 4 years, according to RealPage. Not 19%, 119%. That's not inflation. That's a structural repricing of risk, driven by more frequent claims, higher rebuild costs, and insurers pulling out of high-risk regions entirely. On top of that base increase, many landlords are seeing premium increases of 10 to 20% at every single renewal, even with 0 claims filed. You didn't do anything wrong. You just own a building, and buildings got more expensive to insure. And landlords never pay the homeowner rate. Rental property insurance runs 15 to 25% higher than a standard homeowner policy because the insurer is pricing in a stranger living inside your asset, not you. This isn't evenly distributed either, and that's what makes it dangerous for anyone assuming their current premium is a stable number. In wildfire and coastal exposure markets, some insurers have been filing for rate increases nationally in the high single digits, and in the highest risk zones, carriers have simply stopped writing new policies altogether. If you built your empire in one of the hot growth markets over the last decade, the same Sunbelt metros the institutional buyers love, there's a real chance your insurer decides at renewal that they don't want the risk anymore, and you're shopping for coverage from a much smaller pool of carriers willing to write it at whatever price they name. Now, property tax. Here's the trap embedded in it. The better your investment performs, the more you get taxed for it. If property values in your area have surged, your tax assessment eventually catches up to that appreciation. The exact outcome you were chasing, the house going up in value, is the same event that quietly raises your single biggest fixed cost. Play that forward on our $300,000 house. Say the local market runs hot and the county reassesses it at $360,000 2 years later. A 20% gain, the kind of number that looks great in an appreciation slide. The tax bill doesn't wait for you to sell and realize that gain. It rises now on paper wealth you can't spend, while your rent is still governed by what the local market and your lease will actually bear. You can be simultaneously up on your investment and down on your monthly cash flow in the same year, and both numbers are true at once. Here's the number that should worry you most. Across the rental industry broadly, 89 cents of every rent dollar collected already goes to operating costs, according to National Apartment Association research, leaving roughly 7 cents for actual profit, with the rest going to wages and reserves. That's not one bad landlord spreadsheet. That's the industry average, and it's before you've paid your own mortgage. You bought the house to build wealth. The insurer and the tax assessor didn't get that memo. They just see a bigger number to take their percentage of. Every landlord knows the maintenance rule. Almost no landlord follows it. The rule is simple. Budget roughly 1% of the property's value per year for routine upkeep on a $300,000 home. That's about $3,000 a year for painting, minor leaks, and landscaping. On top of that, set aside a separate capital reserve, $200 to $500 per unit per year, specifically for major system replacements. The roof, the HVAC, the water heater, the things that don't break often but cost thousands when they do. Here's why almost nobody keeps that reserve. The $90 a month that survived our first calculation doesn't leave room for a $3,000 a year maintenance budget. So new landlords do the thing that feels rational in the moment and is catastrophic over time. They skip the reserve and hope nothing breaks this year. Most years, nothing does. And then one year, the roof does and the HVAC does in the same 6 months, and there's no reserve to absorb it, just a credit card. Since 2021, maintenance costs specifically have risen nearly 28%, while landlord profits over the same period grew only about 10%. That gap, 28% versus 10%, is the whole story of modern rental ownership in one comparison. Your costs are compounding faster than your income. Every year you don't raise rent to match it, the gap widens silently until the year it shows up as a loss. Mistake 1, skipping the reserve because the monthly number doesn't allow it. Mistake 2, assuming last year's maintenance bill predicts next year's. Mistake 3, treating a rental like a house you happen to rent out instead of a piece of industrial equipment that depreciates on a schedule whether you plan for it or not. The house doesn't send you a warning before the roof fails. The reserve was the warning, and you skipped it to make the spreadsheet work in January. There's a second layer to this that most first-time landlords never see coming. It's not just that repairs cost money, it's that the cost of the repair itself has been rising faster than almost anything else in the budget. Materials, appliances, and skilled trade labor have all stayed well above pre-pandemic pricing, and every contractor passing that cost through to you is dealing with the same wage pressure you'd face hiring anyone else right now. A water heater that cost $600 to replace a few years ago is a materially different number today. And multiply that gap across every system in every house in your portfolio, and the reserve you skipped wasn't just underfunded. It was underfunded against a moving target. What happens when the rent just stops? Two ways this plays out, and both are worse than people expect. Scenario 1, normal vacancy. Tenant leaves, you need a new one. Even a single month of vacancy wipes out roughly 8 to 10% of that unit's entire annual rental income. One empty month erases nearly a tenth of a full year's revenue. And a month is optimistic. Add cleaning, minor repairs, relisting, and screening, and property turnover alone runs $1,000 to $5,000 per unit before a single day of new rent comes in. Scenario 2, eviction. This is the one the seminar never mentions. A standard eviction takes 7 to 16 weeks nationally, and during every single one of those weeks, you're still paying the mortgage, the insurance, the tax, with zero rent coming in. Add the legal filing, the turnover after the tenant's finally out, and a typical uncontested eviction runs $3,500 to $10,000 all in. Contested, and tenants increasingly do, and that number climbs to $10,000 to $30,000 or more. In a genuinely tenant-protective state, the clock runs even longer. New York and New Jersey evictions frequently take 75 to 90-plus days before the unit is even empty again, let alone re-rented. Here's the part that actually stings. Across nearly every breakdown of eviction cost, lost rent, not legal fees, not court costs, makes up 60 to 75% of the total damage. The eviction itself is cheap. The empty months around are what bankrupt the deal. One bad tenant, in one bad year, can erase the profit from 3 good years on the same house. That's not a risk you diversify away by owning more doors. It's a risk you multiply, because now you've got 10 doors that can each go empty in the same recession, for the same reason, at the same time. And the defense most new landlords lean on, better tenant screening, only reduces the odds. It doesn't remove them. Even a landlord doing everything right, running credit checks and income verification on every applicant, is still one job loss, one divorce, one medical emergency away from a tenant who simply can't pay anymore. You can screen for bad intentions. You can't screen for bad luck, and bad luck is what actually fills most eviction courtrooms. Let's make this concrete, because 8 to 10% and $3,500 to $10,000 are easy numbers to read past. They're much harder to read past when they're sitting side by side. The good year looks like this. 12 months of rent at $2,400 is $28,800. Management, insurance, tax, and a normal maintenance year eat most of it, but you clear something close to that $90 monthly margin across all 12 months. Call it just over $1,000 for the year, on top of whatever the mortgage paydown and appreciation are quietly doing in the background. Not exciting, but positive. The bad year looks like this. Same house. One tenant stops paying in month 4. Eviction takes 11 weeks, the middle of the national range. That's roughly 2.5 months of zero rent, while every fixed cost keeps running. Mortgage, insurance, tax, all of it out of your own pocket. Add the legal and turnover costs on the low end, $3,500. Add the lost rent for those 11 weeks, another $5,500 at this rent level. You are down roughly $9,000 before the house is even re-rented on a property that was supposed to clear about $1,000 for the entire year. One bad tenant didn't just erase this year's profit. It erased close to 9 years of the good year number in a single event. That's not a spreadsheet problem. That's the entire business model resting on an assumption that this year is a good year, which nobody can actually guarantee, no matter how many houses they buy. Now stretch that across the actual empire, the 10 houses, not the one. If those 10 houses were bought 2 years apart in the same metro, on the same rate environment, they're not 10 independent bets. They're correlated. A local factory closes, and 3 tenants across your portfolio lose their income in the same quarter. A hurricane hits the region, and your insurer reassesses every policy you hold at once, not just one. The bad year doesn't usually show up as one house failing. It shows up as several houses failing together for the same underlying reason in the same 12 months, which is exactly the year most landlords who quit the business actually quit in. So if the math is this brutal for one house, why does anyone own thousands of them? Before we get to the institutions, there's one shortcut worth addressing directly, because it's the one most people reach for the moment the long-term numbers stop working. Switch the house to Airbnb. Here's why that instinct is understandable, and here's why it usually makes the hidden cost problem worse, not better. Short-term rental management doesn't cost 8 to 12% like a long-term lease. It costs 25 to 40% of gross revenue, because now the manager isn't just collecting rent once a month. They're coordinating guest communication, turnover cleaning between every single stay, dynamic pricing across dozens of platforms, and relisting the unit constantly. That's not a management fee anymore. That's closer to a full operating partnership, and the partner is taking a third of your top line before you see a cent. Add nightly cleaning costs, higher insurance, because short-term guests carry more liability exposure than a year-long tenant, and a wave of city-by-city short-term rental regulation that can shut the whole strategy down with a single zoning vote. The Airbnb path doesn't remove the hidden cost problem from segment 1. It just relabels the manager's cut as a co-host fee and makes it 3 to 4 times bigger. Same trapdoor, faster fall. So if the math is this brutal for one house, why does anyone own thousands of them? Meet Invitation Homes. It's the largest single-family rental landlord in America. Over 86,000 houses, a portfolio concentrated in Atlanta, Dallas, and Phoenix, generating $2.73 billion in trailing annual revenue. Its closest rival, American Homes 4 Rent, owns 61,479 properties across 24 states, and runs its own internal repair operation with nearly 1,600 in-house maintenance employees instead of hiring contractors house by house. Here's why the same business that gave you a $90 margin hands these companies billions. Every cost that crushed your one house gets divided by 86,000 the moment your Invitation Homes. The management fee disappears. They are the management company, so that 10% just stops existing as an expense. The maintenance markup disappears. Owning their own repair technicians instead of contracting out lets them run higher margins than smaller landlords who can't afford in-house staff. Insurance gets underwritten at institutional rates across an entire portfolio instead of one exposed house at a time. And when a tenant leaves, they don't lose an eviction case's worth of income. A vacancy in Phoenix is absorbed by rent growth in 100 other houses across 17 markets the same month. The proof is in the occupancy number. Invitation Homes runs occupancy above 95%, a level almost no independent landlord sustains year-round, achieved through technology platforms that optimize pricing and maintenance across the entire portfolio at once, something a landlord with 2 houses simply cannot build. And this scale wasn't built the slow way, one closing at a time, the way you're doing it. It was built the way Wall Street builds anything, fast and with borrowed billions. After the 2008 housing crash, institutional money, private equity firms like Blackstone among them, moved into distressed single-family housing at a scale no individual buyer could match, turning foreclosed starter homes into a permanent, professionally managed rental asset class almost overnight. That's the uncomfortable footnote underneath the entire buy rental property, build wealth pitch. Some of the cheapest houses of the last 2 decades weren't bought by individual landlords learning the business one property at a time. They were bought in bulk by firms that could absorb a bad year across 80,000 doors without blinking, while the guy with 3 houses was 1 eviction away from a real problem. Even American Homes 4 Rent's growth reflects this. It's built over 14,000 homes from the ground up since 2017 through its own development program, meaning it doesn't even compete with individual landlords for existing housing stock in many markets. It manufactures its own supply at its own cost basis with its own crews. You are competing to buy a used house at retail price. They're building new ones at wholesale. So here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you if you're building this empire one house at a time. The economics of rental property aren't bad. They're excellent, at a scale you almost certainly can't reach. Somewhere between your first house and Invitation Homes' 86,000th, there's a size where the fixed costs finally start dividing in your favor instead of eating you alive. Most individual landlords never get there. They stay stuck at 3 houses, 5 houses, 10 houses, big enough to be exhausted, too small to be efficient. The empire isn't a myth. It's just already owned. And it was built by companies with a balance sheet to survive the exact bad year that ends the individual landlord's career. There's one more asymmetry worth naming, because it's the quietest one. You pay corporate-style tax exposure as an individual landlord. Your rental income adds to your personal tax bill, offset only by depreciation and whatever expenses you can document. Invitation Homes and American Homes for Rent are structured as real estate investment trusts. AREIT that distributes the required share of its taxable income to shareholders avoids paying corporate income tax on that income entirely. The tax bill effectively skips a step that every individual landlord pays in full. You're not just competing with a bigger, better financed version of your business. You're competing with a version of your business that the tax code was rewritten decades ago to actively favor, as long as it's structured the right way and owned by shareholders instead of a single name on a deed. Let's put the whole thing back together. You buy a $300,000 house expecting $800 a month. Management takes $240. Insurance takes $180. Tax takes $300. You're at $90 before maintenance, before vacancy, before the eviction that might cost you $10,000 in 90 days of empty mortgage payments. The rule of thumb across the whole industry, 89 cents of every rent dollar going to operating costs, isn't an outlier. It's the average. Meanwhile, the same asset class, run at 86,000 doors instead of 1, throws off $2.4 billion a year in annualized net operating income for Invitation Homes alone. Same houses, same tenants, same rent checks, radically different outcome, because scale is what turns every one of those hidden costs from a threat into a rounding error. Put the two owners side by side, and the entire video is really just this one comparison. You, at one house, an $800 promise that survives contact with reality at roughly $90 before a single bad month has even happened. Invitation Homes, at 86,000 houses, an average monthly rent of around $1,950 per home, running at occupancy above 95% with a management fee, the maintenance markup, and the negotiating weakness all engineered out of the model before day one. You didn't do the math wrong. You did the math correctly on a version of the business that was never built to be run at your size. That's the trapdoor under the whole rental empire fantasy. The pitch sells you the top line, the rent, and quietly assumes you'll never notice how many hands are reaching for it before yours. The manager reaches first. The insurer reaches second. The tax assessor reaches third. Maintenance and vacancy reach whenever they feel like it, with no warning. And the landlord, the person who actually signed the mortgage and carries the risk, gets whatever's left, which on paper is $800 and in practice is often nothing at all. You don't own the empire by buying the 10th house. You own it by surviving long enough and building big enough that the hidden costs finally start working for you instead of against you. Most people quit at house 3. The ones who don't quit aren't the ones with the best spreadsheet. They're the ones who budgeted like the $90 was the real number from day one. This doesn't mean the empire is a scam. It means it's honest about something the thumbnail never is. Rental property is a real business with real operating costs, run at a scale that has to be earned before it pays off the way the pitch promises. The seminar sells you house number 1 as if it already looks like house number 86,000. It never will, not on its own. What closes that gap isn't a better paying job or a nicer listing photo. It's underwriting every single house from day one as if the $90, not the $800, is the number you actually have to survive on. The landlords who make it to real scale are the ones who never once let themselves believe the bigger number. There's one more building where this exact trick plays out, just with popcorn instead of paint. Walk into a movie theater and the ticket price feels like the business. It isn't. Distributors claim 60 to 80% of ticket revenue in a film's opening weeks, which means the theater barely breaks even on the very thing that got you through the door. And just like the rental house that clears $90 instead of $800, the number on the marquee has almost nothing to do with the number that actually reaches the owner. The real business is hiding at the concession stand, where a bucket of popcorn that costs the theater under $1 sells for $8 to $10, at margins north of 85%. The theater isn't really in the movie business. It's in the popcorn business, and the movie is just what gets you standing in line for it. Same trapdoor, different building. Next time, we go inside the economics of owning a cinema, and why the movie itself, the thing every ticket is supposedly for, is just the bait for the real business standing 3 feet to the left of the screen.